Will be Dr. Lee. He'll be talking about MRI versus CT, which is which, when to order, and why. Dr. Lee.
So I'm going to be covering for you in a very simplistic manner the basics of CT and MR. I'm going to go over the indications and contraindications for the techniques and describe some fundamental differences that you need to know as an ophthalmologist or if you're a neurologist for neuro-ophthalmic applications. Jason is going to talk to you about the hardcore technical details. And one of the things that I have found interesting is one of the predictions that was made was that MRI would replace neuro-ophthalmology. And the bottom line is this machine has no brain. So there's no way this or any machine is going to replace neuro-ophthalmology. So I'm going to just show you some fun things first. Here's a brain. Look, there's another brain on top. What's the diagnosis? Conjoined twins at the head. These twins are separated. And we've gotten to the point with three-dimensional reconstructive CT scans that we can generate the whole skeleton. Here's a skeleton, but here's another one on the bottom with no head. This little girl was actually worshipped in India for a time by the people in her village because there are many representations of gods who have this many arms. The parents decided to extract the parasitic twin, and she had it removed successfully. This is a 3,000-year-old CT scan of someone from the Middle East. And the scan was done to determine whether this patient was killed or not. And a very famous Egyptologist, employing this Siemens donated unit, scanned the mummy of Tutankhamun. And from that, they were able to generate a reconstruction of the face that matches pretty good the death mask of Tutankhamun. And as a side effect, he was not murdered, at least not from any skeletal CT evidence of injury. And if you thought that was an old scan, this is a 65 million-year-old CT scan of Sue, the Tyrannosaurus rex. This is the largest T-Rex skeleton ever found. It lives in the Field Museum in Chicago, Illinois. And what they did was they reconstructed the skull with a CT scan, and what they found was the olfactory lobe of T-Rex, which fits right into these bones right here, is way disproportionate to their brain, which is basically a brain stem. And the consequence of that is that there's no way that in the movie Jurassic Park, standing still would protect you from T-Rex. T-Rex has smelled you from 1 mile, 2 miles away. And that has contributed to the controversy of whether Tyrannosaurus rex was actually a scavenger and not a predator, because if you're a predator, you really don't need that kind of a big olfactory system. So how does a CT work? A CT scan is basically standard X-ray technology. X-rays go in, X-rays come out. And what determines what comes out the other end is the density of the tissue that it's passing through. So if you put a lead shield up, nothing comes out the other end. If you put a piece of paper up, everything comes out the other end. So X-rays are attenuated, and that attenuation is what creates the signal on X-rays, standard film, and CT scans. CT is basically taking these X-rays and with a computer using slices, tomography, that allows that information to be reformatted into a 2-dimensional and a 3-dimensional reconstructed visible format. And basically this is the same technology that was discovered by Röntgen in his laboratory in Würzburg. It's the same technology from 1898. And it's very good for looking at bone. Bone, as you know, are very bright on CT because the bone is dense. It attenuates the X-ray. And by convention, this is plus 1,000 Hounsfield units. Air doesn't block the X-ray at all, so the sinuses appear black, and the brain is in between. And so you can see this big nail in the eye is very bright on CT. So in CT, the tomography simply means the different planes. You can make one sharp on an X-ray by blurring out the other planes. The computer stacks these up, and increasingly we're using detectors, and we don't have film anymore. Everything's on CD-ROM or just digital in the computer now. So the Hounsfield units, named after Jeffrey Hounsfield, who I'll tell you about in a little bit, define the signal on X-ray as bright, like bone white, and water zero. This is Sir Godfrey Hounsfield. He was not a doctor. He was an electrical engineer, and he shared the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1979 for the development of the CT scanner. He worked for a company called EMI, Electrical and Music Industries. EMI. In fact, the first CT scanners were called EMIs, or EMIs. In 1962, EMI, the music side of EMI, acquired a new rock group called the Beatles. In 1964, the Beatles had all 5 of the top 100 Billboard lists, and over $100 million went from the music side of EMI over to the electrical side and helped fund the development of the computerized tomography unit. Paul McCartney was knighted, but not for this, but maybe he should have been. So indirectly, the Beatles contributed to the development of the CT scanner. So, CT is basically X-ray. X-rays going in, X-rays coming out, and what determines what comes out is simply the density of the tissue that it is passing through. The reason you need to know this is because the language of CT is the language of density. Isodense, hyperdense, hypodense. This is different than MR, where we're talking about iso-intense, hyper-intense, and hypo-intense, because it's signal intensity that we talk about on MR, and it is density that we talk about on CT. The contrast material in CT is iodine. Iodine is very electron dense. It blocks the X-ray, and so we see contrast enhancement wherever the iodine appears. This is different than MR. So CT for ophthalmology and for neuro-ophthalmology is really good when you're looking at bone, so for instance in this medial orbital wall fracture, sinus disease, and orbit disease, because there's good natural contrast between the dark of air, the dark of fat, and the soft tissues and bone. So CT is still good for orbit. So if you need a fast study looking at orbital cellulitis or orbital inflammatory pseudotumor or thyroid ophthalmopathy, CT is cheaper and faster and gets the job done. Reconstructive CT is extremely useful for bone disease, and this patient has a fused suture, and you can see the boat shape of their skull. And this is pre-op. You can see the fused suture line here in this 3D reconstructed CT, and then post-operatively we can see that after opening of the suture, nice opening of the skull. So, when you have IV contrast material in CT, it's basically just iodine blocking the X-ray. And that's because iodine has a very high atomic number and a very high electron density. So we see that contrast enhancement anywhere we see the iodine, but in the brain we're going to see it where there's breakdown of blood-brain barrier and also inside the normal blood vessels. So this is a post-contrast axial CT scan. You can see the skull, very white, 1,000 Hounsfield units, and inside is the circular Willis where the iodinated contrast material is flowing. You need to know about this iodinated contrast for 3 reasons. Number 1, you have to ask about shellfish allergy. Number 2, its major toxicity is renal toxicity and anaphylactic shock from allergic reactions. And number 3, if you're going to order a CT scan, sometimes you don't want the contrast. The 2 areas you do not want the contrast are if you're looking for something that's going to be bright on the CT, that's subarachnoid hemorrhage. Remember we talked about pupil